For 70 years, Japan's constitution was seen as an ironclad barrier against military expansion. Article 9 promised never to wage war, and for decades, the country's posture was exclusively defensive, relying on extended deterrence from the United States. Yet in 2022, decades of quiet strain and shifting threats forced a silent, doctrinal pivot. Now Japan is expanding its military reach, not by spectacle or sudden hardware, but by quietly redrawing the legal meaning of self-defense. Beneath the headlines, what does this quiet transformation really mean for the Pacific's fragile equilibrium? In the aftermath of World War II, Japan's new constitution, drafted in 1947, set a clear legal boundary for the nation's future. Article 9 renounced war as a sovereign right and prohibited the maintenance of armed forces with war potential. This clause did not simply discourage aggression. It created a pacifist legal framework in which military power was tightly constrained by doctrine. The self-defense forces, established in 1954, were shaped by that principle. Their mission was defined as protecting the homeland, with operations limited to repelling direct attacks and never projecting force abroad. The government adopted the term exclusively defense-oriented policy, a phrase that became central to Japan's security identity. From the 1960s onward, Japan capped its defense budget at around 1% of GDP, a self-imposed ceiling that signaled restraint to the region and the world. Instead of building a large, independent military, Japan relied on the Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security with the United States, signed in 1960. This alliance provided extended deterrence, with the United States' nuclear umbrella and forward-deployed forces anchoring Japan's security. For decades, this arrangement allowed Japan to avoid power projection and preemptive capabilities. The focus remained on readiness for invasion or attack, not on developing tools for distant conflict. In practice, doctrine, more than hardware, defined the boundaries of Japan's post-war military posture. By the late 2010s, the security environment around Japan had changed in ways that could not be ignored. The first regional hypersonic missile tests, conducted by China and North Korea, demonstrated speeds and trajectories that outpaced existing detection and interception systems. Japanese Ministry of Defense threat assessments, published in annual white papers, began to highlight a stark new reality. The time between a missile launch and impact had shrunk from tens of minutes to, in some scenarios, under 10 minutes. This warning time compression left little room for traditional deliberation or political consultation. Where once there had been hours to assess, coordinate, and respond, now there were only minutes. North Korea's 2017 Hwasong-15 intercontinental ballistic missile flew over Japanese territory, forcing emergency alerts across the country. In the following years, Pyongyang tested maneuverable hypersonic projectiles, while China fielded its own DF-17 system. These advances made static missile defense networks less reliable, raising the risk that a first strike could disable command nodes or hit critical infrastructure before any countermeasures could be launched. Japanese defense planners, facing this compressed decision cycle, began to question whether an exclusively defensive posture could still guarantee survival. The challenge was no longer just about the size or sophistication of the arsenal, but about the speed at which threats could materialize and the shrinking margin for error. This operational pressure set the stage for a legal and doctrinal rethink, as policymakers searched for options that could restore credibility to Japan's defense commitments. On December 16, 2022, Japan's cabinet approved a revised national security strategy that redefined the legal boundaries of self-defense. The document, running over 40 pages, included language authorizing counterstrike capabilities against enemy missile sites, stating that Japan must be able to respond as soon as possible to armed attacks when survival is at stake. This was not a constitutional amendment, but a reinterpretation carried out through the established mechanism of cabinet approval, with formal advice from the Cabinet Legislation Bureau. The National Security Strategy text avoided direct reference to Article 9, instead grounding its new posture in the right to self-defense under international law and the practical necessity of deterrence in a rapidly changing threat environment. Cabinet records show that ministers emphasized legal continuity, insisting that the new policy did not abandon pacifist principles, but responded to the compressed warning times created by hypersonic and ballistic missile threats. Constitutional scholars point out that by relying on cabinet interpretation rather than a public referendum, the government preserved the legal architecture of the post-war system while quietly expanding its operational reach. This approach allowed Japan to adapt its doctrine without triggering the political and legal hurdles of formal constitutional revision. The shift was framed as defensive adaptation, designed to strengthen deterrence and survivability by lengthening response options in an era of compressed timelines. The result is a legal pivot that is procedural and quiet, not theatrical. It reshaped doctrine through law, budgets, and planning rather than dramatic public debate, and it kept the post-war legal framework intact while giving Japan more practical means to deter modern threats. Strategic power today often moves silently. The Defense Buildup Program, released in March 2023, translates Japan's revised security doctrine into concrete steps. The program functions as the operational bridge between new legal interpretations and the actual fielding of capabilities. Its summary tables lay out a 5-year plan, detailing budget allocations and procurement targets needed to realize counterstrike options and enhanced survivability. The plan explains how resources will be sequenced and how acquisitions align with deterrence and crisis response objectives. The Defense Buildup Program specifies the conditions under which counterstrike assets may be used, only after an armed attack, with cabinet approval, and within the limits of minimum necessary force. These constraints make clear the defensive intent behind the capabilities that are being developed. The program does not simply list hardware. It connects each acquisition to the government's stated intent of deterrence and crisis response, and it frames capability decisions within legal and political parameters. By embedding these requirements into annual budgets and defense planning, the program ensures that the doctrinal shift is not rhetorical, but implemented through policy and resources. This approach allows Japan to expand its operational reach while maintaining legal and political continuity with its post-war commitments. Japan's Defense Buildup Program translates a post-war doctrinal shift into hardware, funding, and field operations. The emphasis is on continuity, not sudden militarization. Procurement records for fiscal year 2026 show a surge in orders for Tomahawk cruise missiles. Deliveries are set to begin in 2026, with a target of 400 to 500 units by the end of the 5-year plan. The defense budget, long held at 1% of gross domestic product, now approaches 2%. The 2026 draft exceeds 9 trillion yen, about $58 billion, marking a 4th consecutive year of rapid growth. Investments extend beyond missiles. The self-defense forces are acquiring advanced standoff weapons, expanding munitions stockpiles, and fielding new Type 12 missile regiments on southwestern islands. Satellite and airborne sensor networks are being integrated with command and control systems for faster threat detection and response. Basing strategies emphasize dispersal and hardening, especially across the Nansei Island chain, to ensure survivability against precision strikes. A former self-defense force planner notes that every acquisition, from drones to hardened shelters, is linked to the principle of deterrence through resilience, not preparation for attack. These changes are practical, incremental, and intended to make deterrence quieter and more reliable. Japanese policymakers describe new counterstrike capabilities as a form of self-reliant deterrence, not as a departure from the country's long-standing defensive tradition. The 2022 National Security Strategy uses careful language, stating that any use of long-range missiles must be strictly retaliatory, only after an armed attack has occurred, and only with cabinet approval. The term counterstrike is defined in official documents as a response to imminent or ongoing aggression, never as a preemptive or first-use option. This distinction is central. Japan's government maintains that its reach beyond national borders is designed to restore the credibility of deterrence in an environment where threats move faster than before. Diplomatic statements reinforce that the purpose is to deny adversaries the advantage of speed, not to project power for its own sake. Critics abroad sometimes question whether these changes stretch the boundaries of pacifism, but Japanese officials point to the continued legal and procedural safeguards. By framing new capabilities as tools for survival, not conquest, Japan isolates intent from hardware, presenting its doctrine as a measured adaptation to external pressures rather than an aggressive shift. The emphasis is on defensive adaptation, implemented quietly through law, budgets, and planning, not on spectacle or sudden militarization. Alliance coordination now sits at the center of Japan's defense planning. In January 2023, Japan and the United States issued a 2+2 joint communique, outlining new measures for integrated deterrence and operational planning. That same year, both governments established a standing joint planning cell in Tokyo, staffed with officers from U.S. Forces Japan and the Self-Defense Forces, tasked with synchronizing responses to missile threats and regional contingencies. Keen Sword, the largest bilateral exercise in the region, expanded its scope to include combined long-range strike drills and integrated command networks, reflecting the practical realities of a shared burden. These changes are not just symbolic. As Japan's counterstrike capabilities come online, the alliance's division of labor evolves, with Japan taking on a greater share of regional deterrence and the United States maintaining global commitments. Neighboring states, especially China and North Korea, track these developments closely, recalibrating their own planning as the balance of power shifts quietly but steadily across the Pacific. Japan's new doctrine redefines power for an age when threats move faster than debate. Policy shifts, not parades, now redraw the Pacific's balance. In a region where silence signals strength, the most decisive changes unfold quietly, felt long before they are seen. What matters now is who listens.